The alarm bells sounded, blaring their discordant warning across the corridors of Outpost Delta 9. Captain Mackenzie felt the familiar knot of adrenaline tighten in his gut as he slammed his palm on the door's sensor of the command deck. The doors whooshed open, and he strode inside, officers turning to face their commander. "Report," barked Mackenzie. Lieutenant Commander Reed spoke up first. "Sir, we have multiple unidentified contacts closing from all vectors. They register as biological but not much else. Estimated contact in just under 4 minutes." Mackenzie frowned, rushing to the bank of monitors at the front of the room. On the display he could make out at least a dozen oblong shapes, sinuously wriggling through space towards the station. Biological certainly seemed right, but he had no idea what species they could be. Or what they wanted. Have we tried hailing them? "No response, sir." That knot tightened further still. "Shield status." "Holding at 92%, replied Lieutenant Wu from Tactical. "Phase cannons powered and ready to fire." Mackenzie pondered a moment. He had a couple hundred crew under his command, not to mention some highly sensitive research equipment. Fighting should always be an absolute last resort, but something told him negotiations might not be possible with creatures that refused all communications. What about the prototype adaptive lasers? Reed shook her head. "Still in testing, I'm afraid. Software hasn't been fully validated." Mackenzie grimaced. That had been his trump card, a new model of directed energy weaponry with advanced targeting algorithms. Early results suggested it could be incredibly precise while also highly destructive. But the team here had run into issues coding the core operating logic, and simulations were all over the place. Too unpredictable to rely upon. Still, if things went sideways, perhaps some unpredictability could work in their favor. "Keep them on standby," Mackenzie ordered. "Standard defensive pattern Delta 3 once they're in range. Let's see if we can convince them to back off before firing a shot." The next few minutes crawled by. The alien contacts drifted ever closer while Mackenzie watched, face taut. The computer sequenced through multiple languages on all known comms channels, broadcasting appeals for peace and mutual understanding. They all met with silence. Then they entered extreme sensor range and visual contact. Mackenzie's eyes widened at the sight. The aliens appeared to be composed of a semi-translucent gelatinous substance, formed into oval shapes perhaps 10 meters long by 3 wide and 2 high. Inside each alien a shadowy mass roiled and churned ceaselessly. They were like lurid jellyfish, propelling themselves through the vacuum. It might have looked almost comical, if not for the utter foreignness of the creatures and their steady, unerring approach. "Any response to our signals?" Mackenzie asked without much hope. "Negative, sir. They're not answering." Mackenzie rubbed his chin. "All right. Stand by on weapons, but do not fire until my mark." Closer and closer they drifted, in eerie silence. Delta 3 was a layered defensive pattern, attempting first to simply obstruct any unauthorized ships rather than damage them. But Mackenzie began to suspect that grabbing these creatures with a low-power tractor beam would be an exercise in futility. Sure enough, that first gentle shove of electromagnetic energy did absolutely nothing. It passed through the gelatinous beings without impact. Reed and Mackenzie exchanged an anxious glance. "Phase cannons." "Try to trip them up," Mackenzie snapped. Twin lances of phased energy lashed out, trying to bracket the aliens' impulses meant to confuse any sensors and disrupt movements rather than tear them to pieces. But the aliens were undeterred. They simply rippled slightly under the assault, then kept coming. Through it all, they made no aggressive action of their own. They neither returned fire nor launched any weapons, but their implacable, unrelenting approach was threat enough. Mackenzie's mind raced through the next steps of Delta 3 even as he discarded it. These jelly creatures did not conform to standard behavior parameters for unknown contacts. They were impervious to scans, communications, tractored obstructions, and sensor disruption. Energy weapons seemed to annoy but not harm them. What the hell did that leave? Report, Lieutenant Wu. Any effect from phase cannons? Negative, sir. Readings are inconclusive, but if we're damaging them at all, it doesn't show. But Mackenzie bit back a curse. Forget phase cannons. Switch to pulse phasers, maximum setting. Let's see if we can boil these bastards alive. It was against regs to go immediately to lethal force. But a dark sense told Mackenzie normal rules of engagement were hopeless here. At the higher energy output, phasers did seem to have more effect. The jellies rippled and deformed as ravening beams tore into them, shedding globs of matter that trailed through space behind them like comet tails. But incredibly, they kept advancing. Direct hits, but still ineffective. They just keep regenerating and reforming shouted woo over the phaser fire. Mackenzie wanted to pound the console in frustration. The aliens were now very close to the station hull. Unthinkingly, he rubbed at the scars on his palms, relics from an encounter years ago. He still dreamed about claws tearing at him in the darkness while he scrambled to jury-rig a plasma incinerator. Was he about to relive that nightmare on a grander scale? Sir, adaptive lasers are signaling ready. They've completed a blind firing sequence for calibration, Reed shouted. Mackenzie gripped the edge of the command console, rage and fear cinched tight around his chest. The lives under his command were in peril from an implacable, unfathomable threat. He had never felt so powerless. Cold stars seemed to gleam from behind his eyes, then crystallized into diamond hardness as an idea seized him. Belay further fire, he rasped. Activate adaptive lasers and link targeting to my neural interface. I have control. Reed goggled in dismay. Sir, that's insane. We can barely predict what it will do. The targeting is coded but highly experimental. Seems fitting, growled Mackenzie. Since we face an experimental threat. Pipe the firing sequence to me now or we're dead. Up on the monitors, the first jelly aliens reached the outer hull. They did not so much try to breach it as simply ooze gradually through, still without any violent reaction. Molecular reconstruction phase tech could not repel their inexorable progress. Online now, Sir Reed reported, her voice hollow. Information streamed into Mackenzie's mind and he grunted in surprise. The adaptive laser interface had interpreted his desperation and frustration, forging it into a firing pattern. He saw it in schematics flashing behind his eyes. It made no logical sense but intuitively felt exactly right. A chuckling calm settled on his shoulders as his vision seemed to telescope down the barrel of the laser itself. Steady, he whispered. His focus narrowed to just a single alien as it penetrated the outer hull. Opaque edges first, then a translucent middle, emerging on the other side and beginning to flow up the compartment wall. The alien stopped, frozen in time and space for one infinitesimal moment. Crosshairs flickered and danced across its interior from Mackenzie's right eye, while his left stared straight through the jelly mass, unblinking. Insanely, he recalled that long-ago struggle in the dark, and a fury rose in tandem with the keening whine of the adaptive laser. How do you like it, you bloody squid? Fire. Brilliant lances of pure, concentrated light erupted in wild arcs. The beam raked wildly back and forth, chewing through metal bulkheads with ease before darting off again, as if searching. No shot lasted more than a second, but unleashed incredible power. Mackenzie hardly noticed the damage, focused instead on the pierced jelly creature. It juddered and spasmed, letting out an awful ululating shriek over the comm bands. The laser had skewered clean through its core mass and continuing on its deranged path, but the alien was not dead. It was writhing in agonized throes. Another angle on the cameras showed two more aliens advancing from the hole created by the first, and dancing light quested back to find them too. It switched on and off madly, never still, somehow slipping back through the ravaged compartment walls to spear both intruders from within. They wailed in turn and recoiled. Steam boiled out of dozens of holes bored by the vivisecting beam, but incredibly they yet clung to a mockery of life. What in God's name is happening? Reed murmured. Alarms blared through the command deck, but no one made any move to silence them during the light show. Mackenzie blinked sweat from his eyes with a fierce grin. The weapon's locking logic had tapped into some primal part of his brain linked to survival and vengeance. It read his very intent and turned his wrath into surgical strikes of overwhelming firepower. Even riddled with holes, the aliens fought to regenerate, but the saber kept dancing back to find more tender spots in a never-ending onslaught. All across the station's hull breach point, the scene repeated itself. Other aliens penetrated into the station only to be met with ruthless photonic retribution. They shuddered and shook as smoking craters were bored into their jelly membranes. For long minutes the battle raged on. Relentless aliens weathered enough damage to pulp many human crew, but their gooey forms contorted madly, always flowing forward, even while being hosed with photons from within. They fired no weapons, unleashed no attacks save their own liquid bodies, yet proved horrifyingly durable. But the adaptive laser refused to let up either. Insanely, it switched targets every second or third blast without pattern. The jelly creatures had no chance to adapt or regenerate from one hit before taking another. Photon spears thrust out of severed artificial gravity plating to impale them from hiding, pierced heretofore impenetrable containment fields, found them around corners and through compartments no normal weapon could shoot through. At long last the aliens appeared to realize they faced an invincible foe. Their wails came slower, more forlorn. The smoky craters blew away less and less mass each time as their forms gradually evaporated like ice under a cutting torch. One by one, the survivors ceased oozing forward. They cringed back, as if in pain from each new barrage, until even that reaction faded, then dissolved into nothing but dissipating vapors. Utter silence fell, broken only by the cycling whine of the adaptive laser cycling down. Mackenzie sagged against a console, gulping air. The cold exultation drained away, leaving him shaken and more than a little horrified. Damage and casualty reports scrolled past unheeded. "Lieutenant," he managed finally, "please log that the prototype seems to show promise against unusual threats." He didn't add it may have only worked because an unusual man had been at the controls.